Welcome, everyone, to our webinar, Creating Structure from Unstructured Data. Down here in your corner, I'm Nick Inglis. I'll be your host. I'm the president of the Information Coalition, and it is my joy to have joining us Sandy Serkes, the president and CEO and founder, I believe, of Valora Technologies. She's one of the foremost experts on auto classification, and it's an honor to have her joining us. Welcome, Sandy.
Thank you, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here.
We have a lot of great information in a short amount of time. I'm going to start us all off with a quick poll question. We'll have some polls as we work our way through the webinar. The first is, what type of organization do you represent? And it should be popping up on your screen as an attendee right now. We'll do a flash poll. Looks like we're mostly corporations, government agencies, consultancies, a couple of law firms, and some other folks, although the consultancy and professional services are coming back strong. Really interesting stuff as we make sure that we touch on the specific needs of each of the groups that are here among us, give you a voice. Sandy, do you want to start us off and start us off with that first slide?
I certainly will, Nick. Here's who we are. If you don't know who we are, Nick gave us a brief introduction. I'm Sandy Serkes speaking. I'm the one on the right. And as Nick said, I'm the president and CEO of Valora. And today we're really going to dive into unstructured and structured data and using auto classification to do that. Nick, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yes, Nick Inglis. I'm the president of the Information Coalition, and I started a little conference called the Information Governance Conference that's become really the premier event around information strategy done at the highest level in the organization. So it's been a wild ride, and this webinar is brought to you in conjunction with both of our organizations, the Information Coalition and Valora Technologies.
Should I dive in, Nick?
Sure, let's do this.
Okay, so obviously we're going to be talking today about enterprise information, and that covers obviously a wide ground of content and file types and things like that. But just to kind of set the stage, I thought I would sort of share with you what typical clients that we see, what it looks like. And different areas of content kind of concern people for different reasons. Sometimes it's just the huge backlog of email. Other times it's what we call ROT. If you're not familiar with that term, stands for redundant, obsolete, or trivial. Generally about 30 or 40% of an enterprise's data would be ROT. And then there are some that have very specific use cases, like we have hundreds of thousands of contracts and we don't really know what's in them, and we need a way to classify and analyze them. Most organizations have a smattering of all of these things. And so what we have kind of resulting in 2018 is sort of a giant hodgepodge of information living in multiple silos, multiple data storage locations, and then we have dozens, if not hundreds, of applications trying to get at that data for various reasons. So this is sort of the state of affairs as we hopefully move into spring here in 2018. So we're going to dive in today. Since this webinar really is about understanding unstructured and structured content, what that means, how we go from one to the other, we thought we would just start with some definitions. So unstructured content is the kind of content that typically lives in a corporation or really anyone doing business today that isn't explicitly structured. So in a way, it's a little bit funny. Perhaps we should have started with structured content, but we'll get to that in a second. So things that are unstructured are content like email, Word documents. This PowerPoint is a great example of unstructured content. And what that really means is that the sort of the meat of the thing could be any length. It could contain information on any topic. Once you have that kind of free-flowing boundary type nature to it, that's what makes unstructured content. Structured content, which we'll talk in a minute, has a lot more structure, has a lot more organization to it. Unstructured content is that kind of free form aspect. Here's sort of an official definition from TechTarget. I really like this definition. And note that it's not just text as we know it or can see it on the screen. Things like audio and video also count as unstructured content. Okay, so that gets us to sort of the definition unstructured versus structured. It's really the question of, does it fit nicely in a database? So here's structured content. And even if you haven't interacted with a database very much, you have almost certainly seen structured content in your personal life. It often looks like this. This happens to be a UK Amazon or Barnes & Noble type site where someone's looking to purchase a book. And so all of this information, price, date, format, you can see how it's highly fielded. That's what structured means. It means has fields. So the ISBN number is this. This right now is being displayed to you sort of like field name, field value. But really it's living kind of behind the scenes in a database. And that is the hallmark of structured data. It's what makes structured data a lot easier to work with because you can query those systems based on the fields or based on the record. Much harder to query an email. Pretty much the only query capabilities you have would be to attempt to query the metadata, that is the author, the sender, the recipient, maybe the date stamp, and just basic flat out search. So structured content is generally easier to manage, to analyze, and specifically to kind of deal with in a more infogov type of way, looking for things like rot or retention or whether something should be under legal hold or have special security layers. Structured content kind of lends itself nicely to that. Unstructured content is kind of a free-for-all, very difficult. That's why we need solutions that sort of solve that problem. Nick, I don't know if you wanted to add anything into that.
I think I'll add to the next slide.
Okay. So, okay, why should we care? I'll start. So if you're not familiar, IDC runs a report every couple of years about the growth and style of data that we store as a society. This happens to be the most recent one, so it only went through 2014, but the asymptotic curve ought to be very clear to everyone that we have become data hoarders in a big way, and every day we're generating more. I didn't put it into this presentation. If you're interested, you can contact me offline. If you would like to calculate your own digital footprint, there are many, many websites that will do that. My favorite is like an elementary school in Hartford that has an online calculator for that. And you can see, I personally am happy to tell you all that I contribute 3 gigabytes a day. You're welcome. But we're all doing that, and that's what this looks like. What's interesting is the difference between the blue and the yellow. The blue is the unstructured data, and this is all, everything we put onto social media, everything we create as kind of business documentation and correspondence, all of that is unstructured data, and you can see that that is rising year over year at a rate of 62%. So it is massive, and ever more so, because this is the prediction for 2020, and you can see that that kind of curve just keeps tilting upward and upward and upward. For anyone who doesn't know, pop quiz, what's an exabyte? It's 1 billion gigabytes. So get ready to start talking. We think petabytes, terabytes, those are large numbers. Get ready for exabytes and beyond.
Yeah, where does the Google come in? Because isn't Google also a size for?
I forget exactly what it is. I'm sure you can Google that, but it's some sort of number, like Avogadro's number or something, some quantity.
The growth of unstructured information is it's been really staggering to watch, especially as companies have struggled so drastically struggled with how to manage that unstructured information. So I mean, the strategies prior to auto classification were to just set everything in a separate area, and I think that's probably one of the causes for all those shared drive nightmares that half of the companies, if not more, are out there dealing with on a regular basis. It's there's a lot there.
Okay, so why do we go from a discussion of unstructured data and it really being kind of the elephant in the room immediately to auto classification? And Nick kind of hinted at it just now. Other than an automated solution, basically we've been either dealing with this manually or more likely just not dealing with it. And it plays right into that save everything mentality, which is by and large what we as a society have done for about 20, 25 years that we have been digital in nature. So, I mean, I am just as guilty. I have 90,000 messages in my email box. It's true. And God knows how many others on, say, Valora's file shares. I came across a file from 2002 the other day, and I'm hardly the only one. So what we've done, first of all, is just kind of digitally hoarded everything. One, in part because we didn't really know what to do with it, and two, because we have legal or other kind of risk concerns saying, don't throw anything out, don't throw anything out. So, okay, we'll just keep storing that. And then the third, the real one, the cost of storage just completely plummeted over the last 20 years. So it was cost effective to just kind of keep storing. So a number of things have changed that is becoming untenable. Anyone who's ever been involved in any kind of e-discovery or investigation knows that the more stuff you have, the more you have to comb through to determine what might be responsive or what you might have to produce. Anybody looking now at things like GDPR or other data privacy issues, the just hold everything is not a particularly good strategy for maintaining proper data privacy. And then finally, we have kind of the records manager approach of, well, today a sort of more grown-up approach for dealing with content is to have a retention policy, which dictates exactly what is to be stored and how, and more importantly, for how long. So just save everything forever is not really a management procedure that is in compliance with a retention policy.
I think that's a really important point, Sandy. That there are a lot of records managers that come to the table and say, we're providing risk management for the organization through records and through our records management capabilities. But then you look at, and they are for the records management domain. But once you look at the big picture of the overall information of the organization, yes, those records are perfect. But then you go to the shared drive, for example, and you find all of the things that were previously disposed of as records still exist in that shared drive, or still exist in an email, or still exist in the backup of the backup copy of a system for restoration as a part of the backup plan. So it's a different world that we're living in from the original days of the ECM systems. Things have drastically changed to the point where the risk across all these systems, it can't be mitigated by one single strategy. Or one records management strategy, or a strategy that covers records or just content or just data. There needs to be an overall strategy, and it seems like I'll not kill the punchline for you, but it seems like auto classification can solve some of these, or at least help us identify how to go about solving these problems. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. It's exactly right. I mean, the kind of phrase that I use, it's a little bit glib, but it's true, is, technology kind of got us into this mess, and technology is going to get us out of this mess. And that's exactly what the goal of auto classification is. It's to take that kind of essentially unknown, blind, unstructured data and to make it structured. Okay, so now you understand why it was important to understand both sides of that coin. How does that work? Well, we're going to get into that in great detail. But the two key things that make unstructured data structured are text and metadata. Most people understand what text is, and metadata, just to be clear, especially those of you that have kind of an e-discovery bent, metadata is not just the file path or something related to the file that comes along with the file system. Metadata literally means data about data, and so it is anything that is knowable about content. So for example, the language of that content, or whether or not it has my name, Sandy Serkes, inside it. That would also count as metadata. And as you will see, kind of the notion of what is metadata and how much can we know about content has really, really exploded in the last couple of years, such that there's about as much rich metadata as there is rich text. So that when you have the two taken together, you get the notion of context. And rather than attempt to explain context to you, I'm going to show you context with one of my favorite slides. So what is context? We all know what content is. Content is the words on the page or the words that you type or speak. Context is really everything else that goes around that text. So here's an example of some text. I wonder if anyone would mind. So here's a little comic. It's a little puppy. He's come over to a desk. I wonder if anyone would mind if I curled up under this desk and took a nap. Aw, that's so sweet. Sure, puppy, go right ahead. Now let's start to look at context. Here's an office worker. Wonder if anyone would mind if I curled up under this desk and took a nap. Maybe like your boss might really care, or a client who's waiting for you to complete something, or perhaps whom you're billing by the hour. Suddenly those words take on a very different turn, even though the actual words are the same. It matters who is speaking them and in what scenario. Let's look at a few more. Here's another one. As somebody who just flew home from LA, that is terrifying. Okay. Wonder if anyone would mind if I curled up under this desk and took a nap. Yeah, a lot of people would mind that. It would be terrible. Okay. So suddenly we're going from, oh, this is adorable, to not so nice, to, oh my God, and to almost a little bit sad. This is, if you can't see the words, it's obviously sort of a hobo. It says, "We'll work for food." Wonder if anyone would mind if I curled up under this desk and took a nap. Probably not going to fly in the lobby of a big office building. And so you can see here how the exact same words really have a different meaning and a different kind of takeaway, depending on who is saying them, also known as the author. Who they're saying them to, the recipients, what their kind of setting is, and how severe the thought is in that setting. That's context. So, for example, if each of these four scenarios just sort of represented business documents or content on your server somewhere, if you just ran a simple search, you would get all four back. And there would be no indication of which ones were more severe, which ones fit the bill of what you were looking for, because it's isolated search with no real contextual parameters. That is what auto classification brings to bear. It adds those contextual parameters so that you're not looking at text in the abstract, you're looking at it in context. Everybody got that?
That was great.
All right. So now that we understand context, let's understand, how do we do that? How do we generate context? Most people know how we generate text, but if you don't, I'm going to show you exactly. There's text in a lot of different places. Obviously, the file's actual body text. We say body text as opposed to header or footer text. If you're a whiz with Word, you know that you can do header stuff and footer stuff. If you're familiar with emails, emails have email headers. That's why they're called that. If you've written a letter and you have a letterhead, you'll notice the word head keeps coming up. Head, foot, those are the kind of perimeter of content, and then you have the body text, the actual meat of the letter, the meat of the email, the meat of the PowerPoint, etc. But there's other text that we get as well. There's kind of given file metadata like path, name, maybe source. And there's anything that somebody might type in for tags. I'm sure all of you, every single time you generate a Word document, you put in 15 tags into the metadata so that you will have good data governance. Good for you. But in the event you aren't doing that, auto classification can do that for you. Okay, so I'm going to show a little bit where text comes from, and then in particular, how do we use that, and what about things that aren't just so text-based, like audio and video? Or what if I want to do textual analysis in English, like I want to determine whether something meets my retention policy, but the document's not in English. So we're going to walk through some of these and kind of show how we get text, how we generate context. Nick, anything you wanted to add?
Well, I think our next one is research.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So this sort of dovetails back into some of the research the Information Coalition did last year about the interconnectedness of our systems. So we're talking about how we can leverage auto classification. Meanwhile, in our organizations, we have so many different disconnected systems that are operating as independent silos. It lags behind the user expectations in our survey, and if you notice in the middle of this this slide, this is actually a page right out of the research. In the middle of the page, it shows strong, moderate, or weak. So that's the connections between the systems. One of the ways that we can leverage auto classification is to really uncover what exists within some of these siloed systems. I just wanted to point that out, that this really just is perfectly in line with the research that's available to our professional members.
Okay. Uh-oh, this is the wrong version. I'm sorry, there are some notes that I'm going to remove and take off. I don't know why we have these. Anna, where's your new version?
It happens.
Apologize to everybody. All right, let's go back to where we were. Right,
We'll
so smooth.
Post-production.
All right, one more time. Now you know it's real. So, actually, what I want to do, as long as we're doing this, I'm going to jump around the presentation just to screw everybody up.
Go for it.
I'm going to talk about text. Because that's where we were, which is how do you get text? I mean, everything that I've talked about so far is kind of dependent in one way on textual analysis. So how do you do that? I'm looking at a Word file. I'm looking at a PowerPoint. Where is the text and how do you get it? Those with an e-discovery background know this answer. There's a step in e-discovery processing called text extraction. And all kind of natively digital files that have content in them have text. And so there's a process that literally lifts that text out specifically for analysis. I will show you kind of what that looks like here. So I'm going to show you a PDF example. This is our data sheet for Powerhouse. It's just fascinating reading. Go for it. But this is what it looks like when it's formatted. There's graphics. There's bold. There are so many contextual clues here that give us information. But most of those are not what a software system sees. This is what text looks like to a software system. Sometimes you get clues, like look at the italics. There's a little bit of white space in the indents. Those are clues. Obviously this is a paragraph starter, but it's not nearly as helpful as the original. But this is what software works with. This is what extracted text looks like. This is what native text looks like. And you can see it's very, very clean. So if your files are predominantly ESI, electronically stored information, or electronically born information in nature, they are going to produce really strong super content for analysis. However, what if I have scanned images? What if I have 20 years of paper that either over the years have been scanned or still ongoing right now? I know many of you are still doing that. For that, we use a process called OCR, optical character recognition. And what that literally does, I might as well just show you. They are essentially computer algorithms that attempt to interpret the black and white pixels into letters. And they are stringing those together to make words. So this is an example of how OCR works. It sees this pattern, white, black, 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 white, black, white, 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 etc. like that. And it understands it's seen this pattern before. This is an 8. And this is exactly why, some of you probably know this, this is why handwriting is so difficult for an OCR engine, because everybody makes their 8 slightly differently. And you might weave into this little section with your 8, or that one's white on yours because you tilt it more. And so while handwriting is difficult, today there's not that much handwriting on our business content. It's mostly email or Word files, PowerPoint, Excel. Those are going to have fonts, and that's what makes a font so strong. Fonts map to themselves. The A in the font is always the same. And so OCR becomes very strong on things that are essentially typeset. That could have been a typewriter or a printed out image. But once you use kind of modern day scanning and OCR, you are going to get pretty solid text. Nick, don't know if you wanted to jump in there.
I was thinking to myself, I can't remember the last time that I actually hand wrote anything for business purposes. Like I just literally don't. Maybe a thank you note or a thank you card, but really the everything for me for the past long while has been digital only. I don't know if that's a trend overall that you see, or
definitely. The last kind of holdout of handwriting is often signatures. And even those, while the OCR is not going to be able to actually read the signature, it can almost always tell that it is a signature based on its location on the page, what's before it, what's after it, like sign here. And it's aware that there's handwriting present, even if it can't read it. So even that is very helpful for contextual analysis, to know that a signature is present, than to not know. So that's kind of really the last holdout. And even now we see a lot less of that. People are using digital signatures and things like that. So, so I've kind of talked. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm in that camp. I've been using digital signatures for over 2 years. So, yeah.
Right. Right. So we talked about how to get text from kind of native electronic documents, how to get text from scanned documents. There's a couple other ways that we get text as well. If we have documents that are not in English and we want to be doing this kind of analysis in English, one of the things that we use is auto translation. Some of you have probably used this. If you've gone to a website that was in another language and you clicked on the button, Google, please translate this for me, you are using auto translations, the exact same technology, and they come out in English. So instead of doing it one by one through a website, that type of capability gets built into auto classification so that documents coming in any language are automatically supplemented with English. So you do have the native language if you want to search in that language or maintain that for some reason, but you also have an English rendition right at the get-go. So that's
powerful.
It's pretty cool. I mean, I will tell you, when we give a demo, we purposely have documents in Chinese. I do not speak Chinese, and then I can read the auto translation and know pretty well, what that content said when 5 seconds earlier I had no idea.
Yeah,
it's pretty powerful.
For the large multinationals, the people in those corporations that, I mean, even the use cases are pretty huge for this, even from a government standpoint, dealing with embassies overseas and doing diplomacy and things like that. Lots and lots of use cases for technology like this.
Mm-hmm. And so that's how we handle foreign language, or in our case, non-English content. And then again, if you want a little more about it, there's plenty of information here. 10 points to whoever can, to figure out what this map is. Nick, you have any idea what this is?
It's some sort of heat map, right?
Close. It's a language map. So like red is English. So you can see it's spoken in, North America, a little bit in Australia, South Africa. Blue is Spanish. So you can just kind of see, it's an interesting way to look at the world by language. So we just put that up there for your amusement and edification around what happens with languages. So generally, most people are using Google Translate. We do as well, currently supporting 106 languages in and out of every language. It's just this shy of the universal translator on Star Trek. So it's corollary. That's what we do with content that is non-English. What do we do with content that is non-text? So recordings of a conference call, video, news media, things like that. How do we handle that? Same idea. We use auto transcription, or speech to text. Where instead of trying to discern, the pixels to find the number 8, we're discerning audio wave files to determine the sound d, and like that. So that's how auto transcription works. It uses phonemes. And so here's an example of how you can go from video or audio into, in this case, time-blocked transcription. So it's kind of coming up every 5-10 seconds with a time signature and saying this is what's being said at that time. There are other ways. You can just have the free-form text. Or if you have a Q&A style, a strong speech-to-text should be able to determine when is a question, when is the answer. So lots of cool things. Again, we're just at the beginning of the chain of getting to text so that we can do all kinds of fancy analytics. We're still up at the tippy top of get me text, please. So all of these technologies kind of come into play to make text. So again, just to kind of get a little deeper, this is what a wave file looks like. It's not that much to see, but each of these is kind of a phoneme, a little sound bit. And we here at Valora, we use IBM Watson specifically for their speech to text to be able to recognize, like this says Sandy, for example. So that's what transcription is. And now I'm going to jump back to where I was, because now we understand different ways to get text.
Sorry, can I bring up one point from that?
Absolutely.
Auto redaction from non-text content.
Yes.
That's pretty cool. I missed that during our run through. That's cool.
Yes, because it's very cool, because you start out with a video and you end up with a redacted transcript. Like that is, you're right, that's really cool, because what happens is this becomes text. So once you have text, the world is your oyster. You can analyze it, you can redact it, you can change it. Would not recommend that in an e-discovery context, but you might. I'll give you an example of when might you change something like that. Let's say that content was offensive and you are storing it in your organization. Unless it's under legal hold, there's no particular reason that you must keep it that way. You can apply filters like this to clean up that content so you're not just sitting on a ticking time bomb about offensive language. So that might be an example where you specifically want to contain the content. And I will tell you from now 18 years of experience doing this, that people are way more casual about their language in audio than they are in typed in text. People are a lot more formal and kind of careful in their email, in their Word files. Then they get on the phone and boy, do they let it rip. So it's just really interesting to see, even kind of conversational style from the same people, how much that changes from a written format to an audio format. So warning to all, be careful what you say, not just careful what you write.
Because auto-transcription is coming to your
auto-transcription will take you down.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
That's cool.
So let's just go back up here. So now we can kind of appreciate the full picture of how auto classification works. So everything we were just doing is really this top bullet of saying, get me to text. When we talk through a lot of different ways that different types of content can be made essentially normalized, that is English, comfortable text that's available to be analyzed. So that obviously is the second step. What we would call tagging or coding or indexing, where we are essentially creating a set of rich metadata, almost like a checklist, about each piece of content. Like, does it have sensitive info in there? Or who's the author? Or does it mention a brand name? There are hundreds and hundreds of different types of attribute metadata that can be created from analyzing the content. I've listed just a couple here on the side. To give you all a feel, our Powerhouse engine supports over 600 fields of metadata. There are basic ones like, what was the date that this was written or spoken? Does it mention so-and-so employee name? Might be very important for GDPR down the line if it does. To far more complex and interesting types of attribute data, like can you figure out the zip +4, the zip code +4, or the age of the person who wrote that? Some of the more obscure things that we've been asked, can you figure out longitude, latitude? Okay, starting to triangulate for GPS. Chemical names, dates of birth, anything that you can essentially conjure up in your head that might exist in the content, whether you know that a priori or you're guessing, you can hunt for and create this fielded extraction. And so what ultimately happens from this tagging step is that you have a digital profile of each piece of content. I sometimes liken that to like a blood test. You fall down, you break your wrist, you go to the emergency room, they take a blood test, and they know everything there is to know about you, whether or not it pertains to your broken wrist. They know what you ate for dinner last night. So same idea. It's almost like that blood test, that tagging, that attribute tagging, it's automatic. People don't have to sit there and do it because people, I won't say they're lazy. Let's just say that's exhausting work. And people are completely inconsistent with each other and themselves. Obviously, software is not. So you have this benefit of kind of methodical, consistent tagging across all of the content in the enterprise. So that's that second step. And then the third step, once now you have text, now you have everything there is to know about the text and all of that kind of attribute information. Now you can kick in a disposition layer, which is a rules engine that basically says, here's what you should do with that piece of content. At the one extreme, whoa, that really needs to be under legal hold, put it under legal hold. At the other extreme, wow, that's really garbage. That's, high flying rot. Go ahead and get rid of that. And then you have everything in the middle that needs to be under some sort of retention governing policy. So that's the disposition layer that says, what is this? How should it be treated? Very often, where should it live? Should it be migrated somewhere? And for how long? And then when it reaches its obsolescence point, what should happen to it? So that's kind of the full gamut right there.
That's you can't underestimate that second part of tagging and how incredibly beneficial it can be to remove the human from that part. So back before I was with the Information Coalition, back when we were still doing consulting work, this was one of the things that we would spot check was how frequently are people actually entering all of the metadata on a particular piece of information when it was brought into the system. And I think our high, like the high water mark, was in the 30% range. So it's just simply not being done by employees now. Whether however much effort goes into creating the metadata schema, if the employees aren't doing it, it doesn't matter. Or worse yet, if the amount of fields that you're asking for are it's so time consuming that employees of the organization aren't actually even uploading the content in the first place.
Right.
So you're missing the benefit of people being able to repurpose that content because that content only exists on one employee's laptop as opposed to being made available to everyone. So you end up with redundancies in that case. The fact that you can remove the human from this at this point, that's a huge leap forward for our profession. Like a huge leap, not a small one. That's incredibly powerful, or it's going to be going forward.
It's good to hear that, Nick, because that very much dovetails with what we see. And something that I will just gently caution everybody out there about is, everybody's like, oh my God, the robots are going to take our jobs, blah, blah, blah. This is not a job that anybody really has or anybody really wants. It's kind of been thrust onto all of us as modern day digital workers.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, there might have been a secretary or somebody whose job it was to organize and classify content by hand. When that went out the window, pretty much when we had to print and manage our own digital lives professionally, so too came the job of organizing and classifying content. And we all came up with our own little kind of sort of approaches. And as an organization, it's a total hodgepodge mess.
Yeah.
I've heard, to your point, Nick, I've heard stories about people trying to get their colleagues to put data into an ECM or a DMS. And instead of the people entering the data, they just hit A all the way down because it's the first drop down, or they put everything into, basic file. So now you're almost worse off than if you hadn't classified it at all, because now it's misclassified. And I hear that all over the place. By sort of forcing workers to take on this action, they will always take the path of least resistance and not worry about the consequences down the line. So I also will point out to people, many of you have been very diligent and very good at creating retention policies and InfoGov policies for your organization. That's extremely admirable, and you should keep doing that good work. However, unless your organization is actually carrying out they're actually executing against your policy, you are actually in worse shape than if you did not have a policy. Because now it can probably very easily be proven that your organization does not follow the policies that it has laid out. That is more dangerous from a litigation or an investigatory standpoint than if you didn't have a policy at all. So everybody take that one home and think about, yes, it's good data hygiene, it's good governance to have policies. Now you had better find a way to enact those policies, because otherwise you've set yourselves up to be shot in the foot.
That is a huge point.
All right, that's going to allow us now to go on. I kind of talked about rich metadata. I gave you a few examples. Here are some just to get your kind of wheels spinning. Folks that are familiar with eDiscovery will kind of recognize the red balloon. Those types of things come up all the time. They're file-based metadata. We're really talking about content-based metadata, and you can see the rest of the balloons, how detailed that can really get. Just to give you a feel, the yellow is just concepts around date. And it's quite possible that a document would have all of these dates. So a much stronger analysis and management of that content would be to capture all of them and use the ones that you care about in different circumstances, like your retention might be based around effective date. but some sort of compliance might be based around signature date. So just different reasons for just kind of building out on the theme of rich metadata. One more thing I should point out, there's also hidden metadata. If any of you have in your kind of enterprise content, if you have digital photos, there's almost always a hidden layer of metadata under there that indicates a GPS signature of where that photo was taken. Think about how powerful that might be in a litigation setting, or that's the sort of the risk flavor. There's also the data is an asset flavor. How valuable would that be to your marketing group? Let's say you had customers uploading photos and you could figure out where they were, with their permission, of course.
Yes. A quick question from the last slide.
Yeah.
We talked about the robots and the technology. Ruth Ann had a question. How much human intervention does it take to go through the 3 steps of auto classification? How much of this is hands off, and how much?
That's a great question.
Jump in. Yeah.
Excellent question. So the first level, the kind of just processing, get me to text, is pretty much entirely automated. That's very hands off. Those systems have all been in play for a long time. Tagging is, there's a little bit, well, let me back up. There's stuff that's automatic that's fairly hands-off, like what type of document is this? What are the dates? Things that are kind of generic like that would be across the board for any client, those are fairly hands-off at this point. Where you start to get into hands-on would be things that are unique to the organization, like we use these product codes, or these are the titles that we refer to the employees in our organization. Anything that has an element of like a list of the information you would have somewhere in your organization, like here's a list of employee names, or a list of our locations, or a list of our product names or our SKUs, something like that. Generally, that listed type of information is really good fodder for auto classification. There's a teeny weeny little bit of hands-on in the sense of identifying the list, but once it's identified and its location is identified to Powerhouse or any other system, that's really all it takes. You can kind of edit that list as you go, and obviously employees are terminating and hiring every day. So a strong auto classification system will automatically kind of stay in the loop with that list or these other sources. It's what we call guidance data, and I'll show you in a minute how that works. The point is you sort of set it up once, that's the hands-on part, and then step away. It auto updates itself from there on out. So most of these things that do have a manual component, it really is just at the setup, and then once everything is kind of tweaked and set up, then it runs on its own. Disposition the same way, rules are the same way. You might want to set up the rules to, I want this information to go into my DMS here, or I'm migrating up to the cloud, and this is the, kind of how I want it structured in my taxonomy. For that, you would want to kind of configure that once and then kind of let her rip across 30 terabytes. It can't be the case that you're sitting there manually doing that, because it just would never finish. So most of that kind of manual effort is at the setup and testing, and then, then you kind of let it go. I do want to say sometimes there is exception handling. Either the software could not disambiguate between something, or a handwritten document was in there, it couldn't see that. And so those would kind of be placed into an exception workflow, and those almost always are dealt with manually. To give you a sense, if you're kind of analyzing this type of technology, you should plan for about maybe 2% exception handling. This is a rough rule of thumb. This is a great question.
Yeah, great answer too. Thank you.
So, all right, we kind of covered this guy off. So I talked about metadata. Let me talk a little bit about rules, especially since they just came up. So rules are basically software algorithms that determine what should be done with a piece of content. So metadata will tell you what the content is, and rules will tell you what to do with it. So that's where the kind of InfoGov angle really comes in. Rules sort of look like, well, like little if-then statements. This is a retention rule that sort of, you can kind of see that fielded data. Document type is a piece of metadata. Date is a piece of metadata. And so it's saying, if this document type is a contract and its effective date is below this point in time, that's just a math comparison, then mark that as active and retain it. Now, again, just a simple baby rule to get the concept across. In real life, that would probably be a little bit richer and thicker and would probably reflect the retention policy. So, mark it as active and retain it until this point, at which time it should be, defensively deleted according to XYZ protocol, right? So once you kind of understand how rules work and, what they lean on to make their analysis, you can understand all the different types of rule-based behavior that you can conduct. I mean, I described retention. It's very simple, very similar to do security level. What is this content? Oh, it's somebody's personal file. It has their date of birth and their address and, maybe some of their private health information. Obviously, that kind of stuff needs to be locked down and secured and prevented from access. If you haven't heard the term federated security, an auto classification system will federate, in other words, kind of like disseminate or share the security level of that content with other systems to prevent access to it based on your login. Okay, and again, there's a whole list of things here that work very similarly. Once you know what something is, you can figure out how it should be handled, for how long, where, and when it should be removed or migrated to something else. So that's what rules are. And to the last question, there's a little bit of setup and kind of manual effort in tweaking those just so. One, that's usually kind of one time. And two, if you do it right, they should self-perpetuate even as things change. They are smart enough, it's a little bit of machine learning here, to kind of self-iterate, that's one of the cooler areas that we've been working on for the last year and a half. And I can tell you as a practitioner, it is just the best thing ever, because it means we don't have to sit there and maintain extensive rules hierarchies or rule data. The system maintains it itself and spits back what it's changing and why and when. Very, very cool.
So back to Ruth Ann's question, given this, the human intervention should decrease over time.
That's correct. Both on the setup, which should basically kind of be done. Sometimes you check in, you kind of tune up maybe once a year, something like that. And on the exception handling, because they should get stronger at handling the exceptions. So right on both counts.
Very cool.
Okay, now I need to look where our presentation goes, because I jumped all over. This is perfect. All right, we'll go here. So I've sort of described what auto classification is, how we get to text, context, how we use metadata and rules to essentially complete the disposition on all kinds of content. These are the use cases that come up all the time. The number one use case right now, well, I'll say number 1 and 2, I don't know really who's on top, would be migration and remediation. Migration meaning people are looking to move large swaths of content from one location to another. Maybe they're looking to put it up on the web, into OneDrive or something like that, or they're looking to take stuff out of an aging ECM or an aging email kind of storage mechanism and bring it into the modern day. And then remediation would be fixing all of that kind of legacy of either no metadata or incorrect metadata so that we have nice, consistent, useful metadata so that we can drive machine learning systems like a rules engine to enact disposition. So those are kind of the top two, although the other ones come up all the time. And of course, GDPR, very, very hot. If you don't know what that is, I advise you to look into it. It goes live this month. Today is May 1st. So auto classification is an excellent way to become GDPR compliant. Wow. All right. Just to kind of show you the whole picture in action, how detailed does the metadata get? What can you tell from something? So I'm just going to click away here to give you guys a feel for what I mean by rich metadata. Pretty much anything that's on there is fair game. What might you like to know and in what context? Again, and then what would you do with this information once you had it? So for example, you might want to classify junk. Very common use case. So here's junk. How do we know it's junk? Well, it's a 2014 Christmas card. It's only going to go so far. So right away, it has what we call watch list terms. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, it's a boy, congratulations. There's quite a few. And the more that are on this one has 2. So it's a total ringer. Looking at the date compared to current minute. There's no further content. So what we call signal to noise, pretty lousy. Heavy graphics, 4,000 identical hash copies throughout the organization. Okay, applied status, junk. So this is how it works. At the end of the day, this is the rule. So these ones up here are metadata, and this down here is the rule kicking in, and it's basically it's based on a confidence score. How confident is it that junk is the proper status? Well, how confident were you with the minute I brought it up? All of these kind of indicators, almost like a detective, all of these clues push it over the confidence mark that says, yep, go ahead and mark that as junk. So that's kind of how the whole system works. Someone will surely ask, and the answer is yes. This is running on kind of Bayesian kind of a technology approach underneath for whoever needs to check that box. Yes, it's Bayesian. That's kind of how it works for classifying rot. Here's another example of classifying contracts. So in contracts, usually what people want to know is what are all the terms of that contract? Who are the parties? So you can kind of see that happening here. How might I classify this contract? I have 200,000 contracts in my organization. What kind is this? Well, it's an actuarial services contract. Okay, and it expires 1 year from the date of February 1st, 2005. So this thing has long expired. Now you see, well, what does that mean in my retention policy? It's not under legal hold. It's expired. There's no other clauses inside it that are mandating we keep it around. Look at this. A contract has become rot. Very nifty. And then just to get fancy, I mentioned GDPR. The same type of technique can be used to identify PII. In this case, we're identifying social security number and plenty of other things. We're also handling the case, and this is covered under GDPR, what we call a warning sign. In other words, 2 disparate pieces of PII, which when brought together can identify you, like a name and a location. Okay, on their own, those aren't exactly PII, but the fact that they're on the same document, which would suggest that Brady and Wilma live here, that makes it PII. And so on. So again, the first part was the tagging, and the second part is the rules going, yeah, there's active PII here. This needs remediation. And if you're under GDPR and someone says, what info do you have about me? You better hope that you had permission to have this. And if not, you need to dispose of this content. One last thing that auto classification is very helpful for is identifying duplicates. And there are different kinds of duplicates out there. There are actually 3 kinds. A lot of you know about, and I mentioned it, hash value. These are forensically identical documents. If I send the same email to all of you, and I include this presentation, then it's going to have a hash match identification that is identical across you. However, not all dupes are forensically identical. If I send some of you this presentation as a PowerPoint and some of you the same exact presentation as a PDF, the PDF and the PowerPoint will not hash. So they will not come up in a simple hash match algorithm saying, yep, identical, even though they are functionally identical. Again, auto classification is going to help with that because it's essentially analyzing the content of both of them and going, these are identical. They don't hash match, but they are identical. And using some contextual things like they were both sent on the same day at the same minute from the same sender. Again, just boosting the likelihood that those are functionally identical. That can be very important if you are trying to clean up a file share, because you are going to have that scenario. Sure, some rot's easy, some rot's a little harder, like this. And then we have the third category, which is often called a near duplicate. These are files that are similar, but definitely not identical. A good example, send out a form letter. We send out a form letter to all 32,000 clients. The contents of the letter are identical, but the recipient is different in each one. There's context again. And then once you know that, you can decide that disposition. Do I want to get rid of all of them? Just people with a last name from A to F? Whatever you want to do there, you want to be able to make that kind of distinguishing analysis of the only thing that's different is the recipient. So I'm going to show you, I think, a file that was saved as Word and then saved 1 second later as PDF. Note the file count, okay? 100K versus 200. It's the exact same file saved as Word and saved as PDF. So here's the file. This is it inside of Word. You can see it, very exciting. Here's the exact same file saved as a PDF. That's a perfect example of a functional duplicate. And in your organization, you're going to have to, particularly those of you in the InfoGov role, you're going to have to make that decision. Do you want to keep them both or only one or only the other? And what's your rationale for that? Okay, that's where the InfoGov people should be adding their smarts, not sitting there categorizing each doc by doc by doc, but making global policy about situations like this.
Smart.
And on to you, Nick, with the last kind of minute to go.
Yeah, I mean, you gave us so many use cases. I figured I would just put up just a classic information lifecycle. So we talked about different use cases at every single stage here. So it's through the capture stage, identifying metadata, through collaboration, being able to bring multiple people and multiple copies, and understanding that version control, even if it's saved as a different file type, retention and storage, figuring out where it should be retained, where it should be stored based on contextual information that's automatically pulled out, discovery, even disposition processes, and archiving processes, pushing information out to automatically into processes for the end of life of the information. Auto classification can impact and make our lives easier across the entire life cycle of information. So it's not, we've talked about in the past all these different technologies that help us with one or two of these different areas. Auto classification is probably one of the first broad technology classes that helps us across and has use cases across the entire life cycle of information. Just call attention to that. I thought it was an interesting point.
I'm going to jump us through to the end. There's a little bit more here, and I'm sure we'll be happy to make this available to you all. But in the interest of time, I am going to jump to our closing comments, Nick. And I'm just going to put them all up here. If there's something that you want to, kind of share as a parting thought or whatever, please do. And I will share that all of you are welcome to kind of reach out to Nick or me. We love talking about this stuff. We could talk about it all day long and all night long. So, feel free to bounce your questions or your ideas to us. There's a lot happening here, and it changes almost every day. I give a presentation like this roughly every other week, and I can't believe how much I have to change it from week to week just to keep up with what's happening.
Yeah, there was so much information in here. I think we could have extended this for another hour at least.
We'll do a round two.
Yeah, part two coming soon. There are just so many use cases. I think that's really during our run through, that was what really stuck out to me is, you buy this technology once and you can use it in so many different ways. I always look at information through a life cycle, and any type of technology that can impact so greatly across all stages of the life cycle is probably something that I want to have in my organization to leverage to make my life a little easier. We talked a little bit. We sort of skipped over this point, but we'll save it for point two, and then auto classification can do the heavy lifting for you, whether it's Valora Technologies Powerhouse or it's another provider. Auto classification really has come an incredible long way, over the past decade, to the point where it is enterprise ready, it is enterprise used, it is happening right now. Your competitors have this technology, and if you don't, you should probably figure out how you can get it too. Otherwise, you're going to fall behind the curve. Yeah, I think we just simply thank you. Seriously, thank you all attendees for jumping in and hanging with us for an hour or so. It really does mean a lot that you're here, you're participating, you've had questions along the way. I tried to address all of those. If you have any other questions, feel free to ping either of us, and then we have some more areas. We'll shoot links to folks that want it. You should be able to see a contact Valora page. If you want to get a copy of this, feel free to click that, and I'm sure we'll pass on all sorts of wonderful info for you. With that, thank you, Sandy. Thank you to the team at Valora Technologies for helping pull this together. Thank you to the team at the Information Coalition for helping to pull this together. Until the next time, our next webinar is I believe it's in 2 weeks. We'll be talking about healthcare with AHIMA, the Health Information Management Association. And then we have some other great webinars coming up throughout the year. Also, feel free to become a member of the Information Coalition. You'll access a ridiculously huge library of videos and webinars like this. It's a treasure trove for you to unlock. With that, thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye.